This game was provided to Crit Happen by Dragon's Lair Comics and Fantasy. Check them out online at dlair.net for all your comic and gaming needs. Hi everyone, it's Tox from critshappen.com. Thanks for watching and welcome back. We're back with another critical review, this time of Fantasy Flight Games' Gearworld the Borderlands. Now this is a reprint or a re-theme or a reprinted theme. I'm not sure what you want to call it. Borderlands, the game, actually came out a very long time ago in the late 70s. This is a steampunk re-theming of it, updated and printed with some new rules and with a couple of extra pieces to the actual game board. You'll see here the game board is absolutely gigantic. The original game board had one main island, and this now has 3 adjacent islands that you can get to by traveling over the vast sea. Now, a lot of people ask me all the time, what theme has never really been done well in games? And my number one answer is steampunk. There are a lot of games, especially recently, that have had a steampunk theme. Some of them have been good, but in my opinion, none of them have been great. So the big question is, with this coming from a couple of designers that are very well known for things like Rex or Cosmic Encounters, how does Fantasy Flight re-theme this, bring it into the modern day age, and give it that steampunk theme that most people really want and really yearn for, and make it successful? Well, let's take a look at the gameplay. We're going to show you all the different resources, all of the different options available to you as you sit down to play the game, and talk a little bit about the dynamics of the game. And that's a key word, because even though we're going to talk about all of the phases, not every phase happens every turn. There are some phases that are dynamic, and at the roll of a die could not happen at all, or at the roll of a die could be left up to the active player to choose if they're going to happen or if they're not. So, let's grab our brass goggles, let's grab our copper bolts, and let's jump into the world of Gearworld. So Gearworld the Borderlands has a beautifully large map. The original game Borderlands did not have these additional islands that are on the outside. But it does add a nice little interesting piece to this in terms of bridging things, literally, from the islands to the main lands. One of the goals of this game is you're going to be doing a lot of building with the resources you're going to collect. And what's going to happen is you're going to take a bridge, and you're going to have a bridge going between these 2 abutments. So it has to go exactly to where the diamond-shaped edges are going to meet. So in this case, Simon's Landing connects to Watts Coast. You could also connect these 2 abutments and go from Simon's Landing to Grey Water, or you could go from Simon's Landing down to Menlo Point. And each of the areas around of the islands and the mainland are going to have those options for you to build to gain access to those islands or get access from the islands onto the mainland. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, the main reason is because the way you win this game is by building Skyworks. Skyworks are these square tokens that allow you to be placed inside of an area and will give you bonuses for doing so. But the first player to place 3 of them on the board is going to win the game. Now, just like anything else, there's a cost to building things, including the Skywork. And you're not just going to be able to build that at the beginning of the game, you're going to have to build up resources. Now, there's different resources. There are scrap, there are gold, there are horses, there are iron, and there are coal. And the game comes with these production tokens. You're going to use these production tokens at the beginning of the game by flipping them face down, shuffling them up, and then placing them one by one, each player taking a turn, and putting them out in different areas. Then, after you acquire your areas, you're going to start to determine what's being produced in each of these areas. There's quite a bit of tokens, so the game board gets filled up pretty quickly. Now, on each of those areas, at the beginning of each turn, you're going to put one of those production resources. So if, for instance, I had gold here on Watts Coast, at the beginning of the turn, I'm going to have the opportunity to potentially put gold on here. Now, there is a limit sometimes as to how many pieces of a certain resource are going to be able to be on a location, and you're going to be moving them around, because just because I potentially use one of my red guys here and I own this Watts Coast location doesn't mean that I have all the resources I need to build something in it. So I may actually need to get this gold over to the prospect, and that's when you're going to start supply chaining. We'll talk about that in a second. But it's good to know that there's basically those major resources in the game. Now, another thing to note is that these guys, these little characters, all they do is represent that the red player is in control of this territory or this region or this area, as it's called in the rulebook. It doesn't represent an army, it doesn't represent might or force or really anything other than I own that area. Your might and your force is going to come from numbers like the 3 on the watchtower, or the Skyworks, 3 on the guns that you're going to be able to produce, and from riverboats and from ships, and also from alliances with your neighbors. Now, the game is broken down into turn orders. You're going to have the build phase, the production phase, the trade phase, the transport phase, and the battle phase. Let's talk about these individually. The build phase is fairly straightforward. Down here in the bottom of the map, you'll see that there is a building cost. And it'll show you that to build a bridge, you're going to need an iron and a scrap. To build a gun, you're going to need an iron and a coal, or 2 gold. That's what the line separating the top and the bottom means. To build a riverboat, you're going to need 3 scrap. To build a skywork, you will need 1 of each resource. You're going to need a iron, a coal, a scrap, and a gold, or 4 gold. And then to build a ship, you're going to need 4 scrap or 4 gold. So as you can imagine, gold gets a little valuable. Now, the build phase is skipped during the first turn, and you're just going to go straight to the production phase. In the production phase, each one of the regions that has a production token on it is going to produce that material. There are some more detailed rules about that, determining when and how many of each type is going to be in there. But for example, if this was the beginning of this turn for the production phase, we would put 1 scrap in the prospect and 1 gold in the dry shore. In a regular game, this whole board is filled up. Not every region is going to have a production token, but a good majority of them are. Maybe about a third or so of them are going to be filled up with those. Now, then you go from the production phase to the trade phase. And the trade phase is where you can decide where, if I, as the green player, for example, own the dry shore, and the white player owns the prospect, and they want to trade materials, let's say the white player also owned Greenhold and owned the scrap here. And let's say they wanted to go ahead and make a trade and say, hey, green player, I need that gold. I'm going to give you these 2 scrap for that gold. You can do that and shift out the materials from one side to the other. If both parties agree on it, then everything is shifted, and you can move from as far as one corner of the map to the other corner of the map. And the reason you're going to want to be doing that is because when you pay to build something, the resources need to be in the region or in the area that you're going to build it in. Just because I have characters down here and up here that maybe allow me access to the resources for the Skyworks, I still need to get all of that into the prospect if I want to build the Skyworks in the prospect. And that's where it comes into transport. After the trade phase, you deal with transporting. And transporting allows you to move materials among regions that are adjacent to each other that you control. So if I wanted to move this gold from here to here, I could do that by foot. But more importantly, the horse resource, which is one of the production tokens that you could get, allow you to chain things together and move even further. Horses also, as you'll notice, have a 1 on them, so they're going to add to your strength in battle. We'll talk about that in a second. But the supply chaining is a way for you to move things really quickly, very fastly. If you're moving on foot, you're only going to be able to move a short distance, so in this case from one area to another. But if you have horses in different regions connecting things together, you could potentially move 5, 6, 10 regions, assuming that you've set up your supply chain correctly that way. Now, after the transport phase, you go to the battle phase. And the battle phase allows you to do an opportunity of 1 attack action during your first turn, and after the first turn, a possibility of 2 attack actions or an attack action and an additional transport action. Now, attacking is very simple. It's a matter of checking how much strength you have versus how much strength your opponent has. You get 1 strength for occupying a territory. So while technically these guys don't mean they're an army, it does mean that they give you 1 strength when you're dealing with battle. But then in addition, you're going to get strength for the guns that you've produced in the areas you have. So if I had a gun produced in this area, this would provide me 4 strength in this area. if I had additional boats, for example, like if I have a river boat on this river piece and it's between Riverholt and Greenholt, this area has 4 total ability to be able to defend itself. There's also ships that will give you 5, and these guys are on the outside in the sea and they point in. One of the aspects of the game is it has these diamond ends that are going to point in. But more importantly becomes movement points. And when you're talking about supply chaining and moving, you have little movement points here that are also on the map that shows you that horses can move 2, riverboats can move 8, and ships can move 10. So there's a vast amount of movement that can happen right there. But when we're talking about combat, combat gets even more interesting because combat has the ability to not only look at the defender and the attacker's strength. So let's say these guys are down here on the Skywatch Hill, and let's say they're adjacent to each other. And let's say the green player has a gun in there. Well, this is 4 strength and this is 4 strength. But what can happen during combat is you can ally with another player and be able to use their strength from adjacent areas. But more importantly, you can do what's called spearheading. And what spearheading allows you to do is if you flip these over, there is a gray side to those units as well. Any unit that is within movement range of the battle area is allowed to potentially be added to the strength as well. So when you're doing the combat phase, it's not always just a matter of where you are on the board and the combat situation is on the board, but it is also where your supporting units are around you on the board that could potentially add themselves to the attack if they were to be called to the battle as well. That can get a little confusing at times, but once you understand the movement and how quickly and how speedily boats, riverboats, ships, and horses can move, it becomes a lot easier to understand and a lot quicker to do. Our battles are very, very quick, and they're actually the shortest part of the turn. The negotiation and the transport usually turns into the longest turn. Now, while there is a possibility of player elimination in this by defeating someone, because if I were to defeat this green player to defeat this white player, then the green player puts one of their characters in and the white player comes out, there is a potential to eliminate somebody. It's very rare that that's going to happen. This is actually much more of a game of negotiation and resource management than actual combat. And again, because all of these tokens, you can see there is a whole bunch of these production tokens that are going to get put out onto the board randomly, one in each different area, not each area, but one in a different area during setup. There's going to be a lot of resources that get put on this board. And the victory really is going to come down to who is going to be able to manage the control of those resources moving around the board much more than just military might. Can you win with military might moving around and conquering areas? Yes, you can. But it is going to be a game of catch-up because your opponents are going to be able to use their transports and their supply chains to move resources away from your forces as they're moving around the board as well. So there's a delicate balance between the concept of the resources and the concept of combat. Now, one really important thing about these phases: the production phase, the trade phase, and the transport phase are all dynamic. What does dynamic mean? Well, dynamic means at the beginning of those phases, the active player with the first player token rolls a die. And if it rolls a 6, the phase does not happen. If it rolls a 5, the player with the first player token chooses if the phase happens. On a 1, 2, 3, and 4, the phase happens as normal. So, if you're going by numbers, that means 1/6 of the time, there's a potential the phase isn't even going to happen at all. It's pretty interesting because the trading and the transporting are such critical components of the game, but yet the possibility for them to not even happen in a round is pretty impacting to the game, and quite frankly, as a player, pretty scary. So that's Borderlands. Borderlands is interesting. Component-wise, I think they missed a lot. The fact that each of the military armies are exactly the same, just colored differently, was a big disappointment. When you look at some of the recent Fantasy Flight releases like Relic, the pieces are beautiful, and these are really tiny. They're very, very small, which I'll get to in a second. But I really had hoped that there would be some type of difference between them. They're not armies. I mean, at the end of the day, they're just marking ownership. So it would have been really nice to have seen something other than color differentiating them. Now size-wise, I get it, because size-wise there's so much that's happening on this board between the production tokens, the resource tokens, the things you're going to build, moving things around, and you have so much space, it can get really crowded. And that was a frustrating piece about this game, is that it does get very crowded very quickly, and it can, at times, when you bang things, potential to have things mix up. That was a little disappointing. The most disappointing thing, though, about the Borderlands is the rule book. The rule book, this thing is long, really long. For a game, now mind you, there's some great pictures. Fantasy Flight does a really good job of pictures and describing things. Some people like Fantasy Flight's rulebooks, some people don't. I tend to like them. However, this one is just drastically too long and convoluted. There's 4 pages I was reading at one point, and one of our gameplay members went, "Wait a minute, so at the end of the day you do this?" And I looked at him and I said, "You just summed up in 4 pages, or what we just reviewed in 4 pages, in one sentence. Why didn't they do that in this?" That was a little frustrating. When you're reading a book, and a rule book, and you're starting to learn the game for the first time, this is really the beginning of the experience. And when it's so poorly written and so convoluted and confusing to explain some of the most simplest tactics, it's a little distracting, or detracting, or both, distracting and detracting. So, mechanics-wise, let's talk a little bit about the gameplay. I love the negotiation. I think the negotiation is phenomenal. At the end of the day, the way you win the game is by putting 3 Skyworks on the board. But it's not about military control and fighting and taking over things. You can win that way. The real way you win this game is by supply chain management and resource management, which sounds really boring. Unless you're a supply chain manager, which if you are, no disrespect, I'm sure you would love it. But at the end of the day, we're not all supply chain managers. And what happens in this game is you start to realize really quickly that A, having iron over here with one player and gold over here with another, and being able to magically swap them from one side of the island to the other just through negotiation is extremely powerful. Especially when you've spent 6 turns trying to build a supply chain that just lets you move things 3 areas. That was a huge impact to our experience. We'll get to that in a second. But the negotiation piece of it is good, because there's always a question of, okay, we're negotiating now and we're friends, but are we going to be enemies in a minute? Are you going to ally with him when he tries to attack me? Or what's going to happen 2 turns from now when I move a little bit closer and maybe you feel like I'm encroaching in your area? There's a lot of unknowns around that, a lot of player interaction that's really well done. However, I argue that is in all types of situations like that. It doesn't matter if you're playing Borderlands or if you're trying to trade wood for sheep. There's always a question of, are they going to help you now or are they not? So it's not like Borderlands augments that or makes it any different or any better. It just takes what is a good mechanic of engaging players together and puts it into this game. One of the things that also came out really quick from gameplay is that gold is really valuable. Because there's 3 things between the guns, the Skyworks, and the ships that can be built with resources or with gold. For example, we had one game where most of the gold was being produced in this area of the map. And one player hoarded it up. He just took control of this whole thing and just started building things with all the gold that he had. And he didn't want to trade it to anyone else because he had all the gold. So it became very, very valuable. And if you'll notice, there's no difference between the amount of gold and any of the other resources. So it's not like it's scarcer or harder to come by. So there were a lot of things from a gameplay perspective we enjoyed, but there were a lot of things that left us a little challenged and a little frustrated. But none more frustrating than one specific thing, and that was the dynamic phases. There are some phases in the game that at the roll of a die won't happen, or at the roll of a die will be left up to a single player if it's going to happen or not. That can really take away from the whole overall experience. I'm not even sure why this is an option inside of this game. We have house ruled it and completely taken it out and had a much better experience in it. But the fact that you can roll a die and completely skip a phase, especially a phase as important as trading, is just absolutely drastic to your plans and can totally dismantle what you're about to do. Not only that, but there's a big difference between challenging and frustrating. When you play a game with 2, 3, and 4 players, and you play with 6, 7, 8 different players, and everyone walks away with the same constant feedback of, I can't believe that we just end up skipping an entire phase. Or worse, you get that one jerkbot, as I call him, sitting at the table who decides whether or not it would benefit him, we're just going to screw with everybody else and get rid of the phase altogether. That can just become really bad. So at the end of the day, the experience left us wanting more. It left us needing more. It left us in a position where we felt that the steampunk theme was just pasted right on top of it. And that was really disappointing. At the end of the day, unfortunately, Gearworld the Borderlands is going to get a miss from Crits Happen. There's a lot of potential, there is a lot of opportunity for fun in the right hands and the right game group, but for us, it was something that left us wanting more, left us feeling as though there were missed opportunities in both the design and the gameplay mechanics of the game, and put us in a position where we felt like it just wasn't something we were going to put on the table many more times, if at all ever again. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be fixed or it can't get better. Depending on your play group, you may enjoy it just as well in an opposite direction that we did, or depending on if Fantasy Flight has any future opportunities for expansions or anything like that, it could build on it as well. So, at the end of the day, Gearworld Borderlands is going to get a miss from Crits Happen, but we'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to leave your comments below on the YouTube channel. Of course, you can join in on the discussion on Facebook, Twitter, and Google Plus by searching Crits Happen, or you can find us at our homepage at critshappen.com. But until we see you next time, thanks so much for watching. We hope you enjoy all of your transportation activities inside of Gearworld the Borderlands. Thanks for watching, keep rolling those dice, and we hope they're all crits.